Hey there, independent Scientologists. Discover a new perspective to your bridge by visiting ao-gp.org. Get in session with remote auditing using the Thetan meter. Are you curious about where you stand? Head on over to ao-gp.org now and take our free personality test. Join the growing group of independent Scientologists today.
Hi, and welcome to another Scientology outside of the church AOGP podcast, Advanced Org of the Great Plains. That's us, brought to you by. I'm here with Scientology Girl and Arthur Mudakis. This is season 9, episode. Hold on. I looked it up. There's so many of them. Episode 12, episode 104. And this one is going to be about Scientology and past lives. It's been over a year since we've talked about this controversial Scientological, independent Scientological subject. Where in the world, where in the universes shall we begin about this touchy past lives subject that people think is so silly in some cases?
Maybe how LRH, and I know we've spoken about this somewhat recently, but how LRH came to realizing it was something, that it was true.
Well, boys and girls, way back in 1950, right after Dianetics was introduced, and people were buying the books, they were flying off the shelves, and they sold so many there weren't any to be found. It's quite literally is what happened. They sold out with the first printing, and he was going around doing lectures and demonstrations on how to do Dianetics and everything. And in September of 1950, he was talking about people were coming up with this past lives thing, and past lives were scoffed at even by LRH. And he was like, it's a bunch of hooey, don't believe it. And then, he went in session, and there were some other sessions at the time that came in that he looked at. And he came back the next day to the next lecture, and he said, remember what I said about past lives? Forget that I said it. They are real, and the efficacy of it is real. And so doing Dianetics and coming up with past lives, because they were going earlier on the chain of engrams, which, from present time or close to present time, and then the next earliest and the next earliest and the next earliest, then people were popping into a body that they were in the a past life, maybe not the last life, but a past life. And so it kept coming up and coming up, and it became not something you drive towards, but something that people eventually came up with in both Dianetics and then later Scientology. And that's how it began in Scientology. But globally, there are lots of other, and Arthur might be more facile at some of these other religions that past lives have come up in. But Buddhists accepted it without any problem, and that's a pretty old one right there. Catholic Church, not so much, because it doesn't stick with the narrative of Catholicism.
However, it kind of does in a weird way, but in a different way. And I only realized this the other day, actually, while we're talking about this. So there is talk of an afterlife, but not in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So is that another life of some kind? Because, preparation of this life will put you into heaven or a hell. So there is a something after death. The Muslims believe it, the Christians, Catholics. There is some kind of afterlife of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps not a human afterlife, but there's still an aspect of an afterlife after death.
Well, my question is did any of the main characters, Jesus, John, Paul, Peter, Moses, I don't know a lot of them, but did any of the main characters ever mention this, or is it something that's just mentioned in between parables or stories? I'm curious about that.
That's a good question. I can't answer that.
Is it because it's
Yeah,
sort
I'd
of
have to
a
look into that.
it's sort of a third. The whole thing is sort of from a third person. You're
Yeah.
telling a narrative story type of a thing, but if there was a particular person that mentioned it, now like in Buddhism, Buddha mentions it. I
Mm,
don't really know of any other religion that did major world religion that mentions it, but you have a lot of people, man on the street accounts, where these stories pop up about past
mm,
lives. The kid in Israel who was murdered in his past life, and he took the people. He was like 7, I think, to the village and said, "This is where I was murdered, and my body is buried." And then he went and pointed out the guy that did it,
Hmm.
and they found proof on the body that that was the guy that did it, and
There's,
incarcerated him.
I think there's
yeah.
also a kid in, I think it's Cape Town, who firmly believes and recalls that he was Princess Diana.
I've heard of that.
Mm,
I've heard of that.
It's very interesting. And if I was Diana, I'd want to try my best to try and retain my memories, because we all know that there was some kind of conspiracy there about
Yeah,
how she died.
yeah, and I think that that's an interesting thing that we didn't bring up in the last podcast last July about past lives and why and how it is so confusing to people. If you consider yourself to be the character, let's say we're just looking at it from a movie role to be as non-stimulative as possible, all of a sudden the lights just go out.
Mm.
mm,
Your awareness is with the body is gone, and maybe if you're in really good shape as a being, you might perceive some information from it, but just from an auditor standpoint, a lot of the accounts that I've had on past lives and when things end is it's sort of like the ending to The Sopranos.
mm.
It's just a black screen with
Yeah, yeah.
don't stop believing. And you're like, well,
Just
what?
quietly. That
Right?
really upset me.
What? Yeah, what? Right? What happened? You
Uh,
don't know what
yeah.
happened, and then there you are being squeezed out of a small hole into a bright light and being spanked on the bottom, or whatever they do now. I mean, that's what happened with me in
Mm-hmm.
the late 60s.
I will say though, I have heard a lot of accounts that bright light thing. Okay, sure, it can be the theory of birth. However, prior to, like, somebody who has had a near death experience, right? They haven't sought out that body and seen the bright light. Therefore, the bright light is kind of before.
Well, I'm talking about the bright light of the
Mm,
the, the lights in the
Yeah,
birthing
yeah,
in the 60s. That's how they did it. When my kids were born, there were no bright lights.
yeah.
I mean that they changed from that, and it was like more like a motel room in a hospital, and there weren't any bright lights involved at all. And the doctor didn't even have a headlamp on his head. I mean, it was much
mm,
more havable as a baby coming out of the womb. But you're referring to the bright light at the end of it all. Is that what you're
Yeah,
referring to?
like
Well,
it's
that's yeah,
just
that's
pretty amazing that there's so many people that have seen
well,
the
yeah,
same thing.
yeah. Well, it is the homing beacon to come back to what LRH describes as the past, the between lives area.
Mm. Now, is
Yeah.
is
mm.
that confidential
Interesting.
material?
No,
No.
no, it's just talks about it openly. It's not mentioned on the OT levels at all,
Mm.
at all, and that is
Mm,
where you return back to one of these stations, and it's the best example would be those scenes in the Matrix where they have the bodies in the tanks and they're connected up and everything, and that's how whole tracky that movie is because it's quite like that, where you throw a Thetan into the body and then you can pain, drug, hypnosis the body, and the body is merely a transitory vessel that you can do all these things to kick it out of the body and then send it back to Earth to start over again without any recollection,
mm,
they hope, of what the past life was. Because Hubbard says if a person doesn't go to a between lives area for 4 or 5 lifetimes, they start to get their abilities back, which is what these guys don't want. Now, I showed you this yesterday, Arthur. I put it on the college. I wanted to mention this because I think this is very important when it comes to past lives and, what you're dealing with there. And it's a super small quote. And I just happened to be going through cleaning up some of the organization executive course lectures a little bit more for a new website. And this is what Hubbard says, super short. When you take this into consideration, what happens to people when they die? He says, a man is known by the stature of his enemies. This is the name of the policy letter, stature, from February 1982. He says, a man is known by the stature of his enemies. If they see danger in him, he must be bigger than they are. LRH, founder. Mic drop. I mean, wow. Man is known by the stature of his enemies. If they see danger in him, he must be bigger than they are. So this between lives area, you look at this from a between lives area and what they do to a person to get them to forget and come back and do another lifespan in a body. That tells you something. They're afraid. They're afraid of what a Thetan can really do and be. And that has to be taken into consideration. Hubbard says when you die, plan on and go to some place that you really enjoy being, so as to avoid the between lives area. So if there was like in my mom's case, she liked there was a state park north of Kansas City that she loved in the fall, and I told her several times and quizzed her, where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? And she said, I'm going to go there. And I said, okay. So, it helps to stay away from the between lives area because basically you're being programmed. This is what Hubbard says. My reality is the same. I've seen it. I've been there. It ain't no fun.
So I have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you've sort of answered the first, which is that it's not really a choice to forget our past lives.
No, it's not. I mean, he says, if you think about all of the things you lose, you lose your stuff, you lose your communication lines, you lose your body. It'd be like being put in a universal timeout. Well, sure, you want to forget it. So that helps.
So he said that you want to forget it, and he also then said that there's a station that basically programs people to forget the stuff.
Yeah, and puts in false goals so that you're doing what they want you to do, as opposed to what you may want to do, which complicates things. And these things do come up in auditing sessions from time to time, depending on the individual.
Right. Okay.
Arthur, you look like you want to say something.
Because even in the hypnosis world, because there's a lot of past life therapies that they do in hypnosis. So Dolores Cannon is really famous for it.
Yeah.
So she developed her own process around that. But even outside of that, there's been a lot of projects where people have used hypnosis to induce people into past lives and then tried to collect as much information as they could, and then with available records tried to verify these things. And some of those documentaries are actually pretty interesting at how accurate that kind of thing can be. And the biggest downside was because a lot of the past lives were so long ago, records were kept quite poorly, so churches would be burnt with all the birth records, places would be destroyed through war, all those kinds of things, which makes it really hard to verify past lives. But then when you move to the Scientology side of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, a history of man was based on the collection of data received by past life experiences. Is that right?
Well, the history of man is basically the time track of the body and that which keeps the body running, the genetic entities. It is not the time track of a Thetan. A body is run by for lack of a better word, and I'm just using this term because it's probably easier for people to understand, and it's an analog. It would be similar to the chakra points that a body is said to have. And Hubbard talks about this, and he says he even uses this same analog. So these genetic entities have their own past lives that they live, and they have been through certain incidents as a commonality, and these things came up in session. And this was early on in Scientology when the first meter was used. And like when I read it the first time, I was 17, living with my mom and dad, and I ran into the bathroom and threw up because it keyed me in, triggered me so much. Body, it did. And I felt awful that I had somebody else living in the body with me. You know, it felt like watching the movie Alien or something, you know, when you have a parasite in you or a worm. That's how it felt.
Well,
But these,
I mean, in contrast, well, the same thing really with me and my upbringing. You know, I would watch these shows with my mom. It was TBN, Trinity Broadcasting Network.
Yeah.
And they would have people like, gosh, what's that guy's name? I don't know, but he's actually almost practically been debunked as a fraudster, but people still buy into his bullshit.
Yeah.
But he does exorcisms on camera.
Yeah.
And gosh, I wish I could remember his name. But anyway, and that shit was traumatizing because, you know, I mean, growing up, I basically had family members tell me, listen, if you aren't good, you can open doors to the devil, then you can be possessed. And that's pretty scary. Like, because, and it's kind of like viewing it in a parasitic way.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned parasitism.
You're just the host, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that because, well, lots of religions talk about that particular thing. And there is a crossroads between the parasites and your own recollections, because like Hubbard says, the universe is teeming, flooded with life. There are far less bodies than there are beings. And, you know, it is a competition to get the best body that you can when you're shopping for one, and you have to fight for it. And this is where the what did you call it, that he does on stage?
Oh, exorcisms.
Yeah, I always forget that word for some reason. You know, these exorcisms and stuff have existed in world religions for thousands of years. You know, any medicine doctor, card-carrying medicine doctor, is aware of this phenomenon, and that a body can be taken over by another being. Well, yeah, it's true, and Hubbard ran across this too, and that's how History of Man came up, is that you're sharing this space. This is one of the ways that it can be shared in as a composite being, is that their feelings are your feelings are their feelings. Their history is your history, and this was something that he had to sort out because it was very confusing, and some things weren't getting better because of these entities that run the body, as opposed to when it ran well and you were dealing with the person's own past lives. So History of Man breaks that down, and it's very earthy as far as, you know, the history of clams experience and how the bivalve, you know, lives, and I mean all kinds of stuff. And it's a difficult read because it's hard to imagine that kind of a life.
Yeah.
But that's a form of past life as well. So he sorted this out. Then he did the where he came up with his own past life stuff and sent some of the Sea Org members out to go find these things that he said where they were at. And sure enough, they were there in these past lives that he'd had in the Mediterranean. And that book is no longer being published by the church and hasn't been for decades. Mission into Time, and has lots and lots of pictures in it. And he was accurate on these things. So that gives an example. But, you know, the funny thing about past lives is if it's far enough back, there isn't even dust left of that past life, especially if it wasn't on this planet. And let's say it was on a planet in a star system that the star went supernova. Probably not even dust left from that area. It's just gone, and that's the important thing. When I was growing up, my dad, he talked about past lives a lot, and it was a very, very interesting subject to him, and he was kind of haunted by his past life, and because it came to a abrupt end by Nazi Germany guys. And the funny thing is, though, that when you deal with past lives with somebody, it isn't very much what happened in the life. It's what the person decided because of the life.
Right. Your postulates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything else was sort of like window dressing.
Well, this kind of falls in line with both Hinduism and Buddhism, where the core beliefs are that you are a soul, and basically you go through life, and your next life will be predetermined by the karma that you have, which is, I mean, okay, you can say, well, something out there is rewarding or punishing you for whatever, but really it's you doing it to yourself.
And that's
So you
exactly
put
what I
in
was
your
gonna
own
say.
ethics,
Yeah.
i.e., you put in your own karma.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And you can almost say aberration is a sense of karma,
Of
is
course.
a sense of karma as well. So you come into this life aberrated from your previous experiences,
Yeah.
Yeah.
choices and decisions and all those kinds of things, and you
Yeah.
come into this life with it.
Yeah. It will
Yeah.
be. It's sort of like you start out with a straight line, and then as you go through a lifetime and a lifetime, you start developing a labyrinth of that straight line.
Yeah.
And then
Mm,
before you know it, you can't get out of the labyrinth that you've created yourself because of all of the alterations of the truth,
Right.
because you're
yeah.
not willing to look
Yeah.
at the things that you did and not take responsibility for them. And that's the biggest benefit that you have in Dianetics and Scientology regarding past lives. There isn't a past life rundown. The
Yeah.
Dianetics would probably be the closest thing to that, and if it comes up, it comes up. But there isn't anything where, I mean, other than maybe some sort of a sick check question where you're asking about overts and withholds, and that's rare
Mm.
on the modern bridge. There are those questions, but you're not really looking for it. If it comes up, it comes up. And you're looking at the postulates the person made, the overts the person committed, um, or, the valence that the person was in that was a solution to a problem in that past life. I mean, that's all that it was in the 60s, is handling those valences that were causing you to be and do things that made you postulate things that created that labyrinth. Now, the interesting bits. Did you play piano? An exceptional artist, or you'd like to have those abilities back. And in a lot of cases, when people clear these things up, they start to get those abilities back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is sort of a side rail in a way, but um, do we, because what I've basically pulled up something here, and I'm looking while I'm listening.
Yeah.
So I was talking about Hinduism, Buddhism, but also a lot of these others. They mention three things: we have a soul, we have this karma thing, or they have different names for it, and then they also almost exclusively strive for enlightenment. Do you think we're trying to achieve that with auditing?
No, I mean, almost exclusively. I would say that you're as a being, you and I have talked about. I don't know that I've mentioned it to you, Arthur, but she and I have talked about, how we got here. What was day one in the physical universe, type of a thing. If like we were talking about earlier, when life ends, you don't get a memo, a registered letter, or anything like that, or it's on the calendar. Today, I'm going to die. Unless you've got a fatal, body problem, cancer or something, you can say roughly, probably sometime next week, I'm going to shuffle off. But typically, you don't get that message. You also don't get an email, a registered letter, or much information on when you come into the physical universe, and you're faking it till you make it, stumbling through the physical universe going, this is what I shouldn't do more than I should do. And then you don't necessarily take that information with you. So it's like playing a video game and forgetting what the game is about, and then jumping back in and spawning at a new spawn point and doing it again and again and again. Now, earlier on, there wasn't much. This universe didn't contain much. It took a long time for things
Mm.
to accumulate and solidify, and gravity to take hold of things and all of that, because I'm just basing this off of my own perception and recollection. It was just a big black room. So you're not given this information, because this universe is forcing you to forget. Because, like he
Mm.
says, even this universe is a tough universe, and even the tigers have a hard time surviving and keeping Scientology working. And that is very much the truth. This universe is made to punish something that is not part of it, and the Thetan is not part of it.
Well, the universe is a problem.
Well, the universe is a problem because it persists per the
Yeah.
Scientology axioms.
But, I mean, wherever we look, I mean, okay, sure, we like to think of problems as a negative thing. And it probably is when you really think about what you could be just being instead of doing. But everything that we do is in some way, shape, or form to prevent a problem or fix a problem, solve, etc.
Right, which we've talked about in other podcasts.
Yeah.
On, at some point you're like, why do I want to do this again?
Yeah.
But and that's the thing, is if you had all the answers, you probably wouldn't do it again. You would choose some other type of universe. And we just mentioned to Arthur that he should watch Dark Matter.
Yeah.
The Apple TV
That was really fun.
show, because it goes. I don't want to. I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything like that. It approaches it from a pharmaceutical aspect to shutting off the frontal lobe of the brain to get the person to basically open their awareness to an infinite number of universes that they are in.
And that's funny because
at any given time.
In these Eastern religions and stuff, they do talk about the third eye, which just so happens to be on your basically the forehead, which is, it has the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
So.
And it's a very interesting. The Dark Matter is a very interesting story in the fact that when you get these options to go through these different doors, the different universes are what it is that is on your mind at the time, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. But they are similar to your home physical universe. They're just different physical universes, and they can be god awful, or they can be whatever it is that you put your attention on. So it's really thought provoking. Arthur, you look like you're deep in thought on something.
Well, pre-Scientology, I've had many experiences with past lives and exorcisms and beings and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in my world, it's very valid and very real.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's so valid and so very real. It's so normalized in my life at the moment. I have no judgment towards it. I don't have any fear towards it. I don't have um, anything like that. Um, and I suppose, in the spiritual community, if you will, um, there's a big pull towards past lives, and people believe that. Um, and I have to admit, going into Scientology, this changed my perception as well. That we have a handful of past lives, and it's one or two of those past lives that is interfering with my current relationships. Or, I hear people, they go to past lives because they're having an issue in this life around their partnerships. And so they'll go and get a past life regression to resolve that issue. And then it's quite interesting how some people really identify with their past lives quite strongly in this life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people that are Cleopatra or, you know, somebody really significant. And in this life, you know, oh, I was this person and I was that person. And it's like, well, you're not them now. Who cares?
Right. Right.
Um,
Hubbard talks about that a lot
uh,
too. You know, how many people thought they were
yeah,
Napoleon when they weren't Napoleon. They were people that were opposing Napoleon. Eh,
yeah. And so but it kind of raises the question too, right? In the sense of, okay, so let's say we have a past life, um, whether it's through hypnosis, whether it's through Scientology, through auditing, you come across a past life. Now I've experienced both. Um, it comes a question of, okay, is this just my brain, my subconscious? Because the subconscious only communicates in impressions and images. It doesn't use words, right? So is this my subconscious trying to communicate something to me in a way I'll understand it through images and impressions,
mm-hmm.
through a past life,
Mm-hmm.
or a character playing a role, completely fictitious?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the opposite? Was I actually there? Because some of these experiences can be so intense,
Mm-hmm.
with the clarity of it as well. I don't know, can I share just one past life I had?
Sure.
Um, there was one I had where I was executed and my throat was cut.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while I was experiencing it, and that was actually through auditing
Mm-hmm.
that particular one,
Mm-hmm.
and what I found really interesting with that was not only did I feel it, but I could hear my cartilage in my ears,
Mm-hmm.
like and I could hear the cartilage, and like even talking about it now, I can hear it while I'm speaking it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was so real to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just so
There's
real to me.
the details of that particular thing. You know, while the body
Yeah.
is still functioning and
So
all
while
that.
I'm experiencing it, there's absolutely no denial that I was there
Yeah.
while I'm experiencing it. However, pondering it afterwards, was I there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and that is the thing, is that some of these things are so awful because that isn't just immediately lights out. People tend to want to forget those too because they're so awful. And
mm,
you know, the important thing to note is that from a composite being standpoint, you and all the clowns in the bus with you, a lot of the things that a person comes up with when you're auditing them generally may not be your past lives. You're just auditing them generally. But
yep.
the value of them, the case gain that you get, is still high because they are now handled. And then whatever,
Mm,
because if things are real, if you were really that aberrated, you would not be the Thetan in charge of a body, because you would be degraded enough
yep.
that you couldn't do that. And then you would be one of these other clowns in the bus that is just saying, I am you. So it's hard to, and it's not even really important whether you do or you don't, because at the end of it, you lived on some planet and X, Y, and Z happened. What does that have to do with anything right now? Well, there was one postulate there, but that's rare when that comes up. It's typically a valence that the
Yep.
person was in that's holding them in that position. And when they recover their own valence, the whole thing just as is and vanishes. And there's no problem with it. So, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting to note that it is a phenomenon and that this stuff goes on. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is your own personal considerations about what you did or didn't do and what you decided. It isn't whether you could play the piano well or you were Napoleon or whatever. It's just interesting. You look like you had something you want to say, Scientology.
Yeah. So I want to ask a question. Um, so okay, we know that Hubbard basically took some things from other religions, not
Mm-hmm.
took, but he explored and expanded, etc. Right?
Right.
So I would say that the Thetan, I don't want to call it a theory, but the
The
that
viewpoint
aspect,
is.
yeah. So that aspect, like being a Thetan and stuff, it's. I think I read that Aaron Hubbard said that it was an individual thing, like you're a Thetan, I'm a Thetan, etc. It's
Mhm.
not just one thing, right?
Right.
So
We're not all one.
right, so that kind of goes more towards Hinduism.
Mhm.
And if you look at the karma thing, as I was saying, um, it suggests that you obviously sort of must have a mind that records this stuff.
Mhm.
Versus in Buddhism, there's also this karma aspect. However, this is sort of more about awareness. So, like in Buddhism, there's this belief that you're a consciousness that sort of continues on um, from, I guess, some sort of pool or something
Mhm.
of consciousness, um, which means that you don't necessarily have a mind. It's more just a case of you being conscious, and then it depending on how much your conscience is, then it's kind of like if you have overts, right?
Mhm.
Your awareness becomes less, so therefore your consciousness is less,
Mhm.
and in that way, it determines what you'll have versus what we believe, which is that you as a Thetan are an individual, and you have a mind. So I guess my question is, where, like, at what point did LRH choose which one? Like whether we were just consciousness or whether we were like what did he base that off of? What findings were there to basically say, look, we are an individual and we have a mind that basically continues on with us indefinitely.
Well, I think it comes down to the direction that auditing.
I know that's a tough question.
It is. It's a smart question too. Um, it kind of came down from we didn't have auditing, and then we had auditing. We had Dianetics auditing, and then he shifted towards dealing with the being, not so much the body, due to legal issues where he lost the copyright and everything like that. So he started going down a more spiritual side instead of the Dianetics body side for about 10, 15 years. Uh, and then through the Scientology auditing, we started to get a better understanding of these phenomena that popped up because of Dianetic auditing. It all goes back to Dianetics. And it was found that the mind to use, because even in the 50s, the reactive mind was called the bank. It was a data bank. They had computers back in the 50s, but they were ridiculously large and ridiculously heavy. And the bank was where the data was stored. That became the reactive mind, and then there was the mind. And the Thetan records everything that happens, whether it is in the physical universe or in the spiritual or theta universe, per Hubbard in the Scientology axioms and Dianetic axioms. And this was found to be the case, is that you're constantly recording this information, because without having a comparable, you got nothing.
So what you're saying is the proof was because people were having, I guess, past life um, realizations and visions and that sort of thing when going and auditing. They were
Mm-hmm.
recalling things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, who's to say that we aren't just consciousness? Because you said it yourself in this podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said that some people thought they were people like Napoleon, but they were actually people against Napoleon, kind of a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who's to say that because of this shared consciousness, um, that we didn't just like pick up from somebody else's past life? Do you get what I'm saying? Like if you were a Thetan, obviously in a body, you couldn't, and even without, you couldn't experience what somebody else was experiencing. However, if I pass away, right, and I have clear memories of when I was Jonathan Burke as a kid, right, that would indicate that we were part of a larger whole, that we're tapping into consciousness from all kinds of sources,
Well,
meaning not individual,
the
as Thetan.
the interesting thing is that when you get a being, and feel free to chime in anytime you want, Arthur. Just dive in. You don't have to worry about cutting calm or anything.
Okay. Okay.
The interesting thing is that when you start to get a Thetan in a little bit better shape through some auditing, you'll find that their access to their track, their time track, their whole track becomes very, very almost scarily accurate down to the second. And it's hard to explain how in the world a being can mark something, and you have to look at this, and he talks about this in a technical bulletin called dating and locating, because you will have somebody that is in this quote unquote good shape that I'm talking about, and you're trying to date and locate an incident to get the as isness, to get them to see it for what it is. And they will go there and they will be able to tell you all of the idiosyncrasies, where the sun was, what color it was. Maybe there were 2 suns, maybe there were 3, maybe there were 34 moons. All of this stuff, all of these ridiculous details, they will offer up on their own. And now, some listeners could say, well, that's just their imagination. Well, I can dig that too. But the thing is if it rings true for the Thetan, it rings true for the Thetan, and it is true because there is this recordability that a being has, that they're getting the sense and pervading of everything around them in whatever universe that it is in. And it is really, truly awesome to see in session, because they'll just blurt out these facts and how this whole thing went down, and it's in there almost kind of creating a storyboard of the movie that they were living at that time. I'm going to give you an example of this. With self-analysis, you're getting the person to recall particular, very specific things. And I was doing this yesterday with a PC. Okay. I'm going to do this with both of you. So I'd like you to recall, Scientology girl, your 8th birthday, what the furniture was, and what the smell was at the time.
Okay.
Tell me about that.
Well, the first thing I saw was just couches. They were ugly. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay. Okay.
Back then I think that like modern couches and stuff, sort of not patterned. These were very much patterned. Think of granny couches, basically.
Yeah.
And the smell was sort of like of wood, like pine,
At the
oak.
time.
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, Arthur, your 8th birthday, what the furniture looked like,
Yep.
and
Yep.
what was
Yep.
the smell?
I'm already there.
Yeah. See.
Yep. We're in the
Both of you.
we're in the garage, and I had like a whole heap of friends, and there was like plastic coverings on the table, fairy bread, cakes, chocolate crackles. Oh my God, chocolate crackles. And it was a really nice day. And it's funny you asked the smell, because the air smelled differently back then when I was younger.
Okay.
It actually felt
Show
cleaner,
off.
interestingly.
Show off.
I had more time than you, so
Okay. Okay. And now let's get down to the nitty gritty here with something even more specific. Let's see here. Hang on. I'm gonna go to the latter ones, because these are, a lot of them are less specific, and I want to prove. Okay. So, Scientology girl, I'd like you to recall a time you got back something you had lost and what the personal motion was at the time. What'd you think of?
Honestly, I'm still thinking.
Okay. Okay. You
Um,
got back something you had lost and what the personal motion was at the time.
So what's personal motion?
Personal motion would be what your body motion was at the time, how you were moving. You might have been sitting twisted looking at somebody, or you might have had your legs crossed and wiggling your foot like I do.
Okay.
My mom did that. I do that.
Does it
It's called
count?
restless leg syndrome.
Does it count if it wasn't the same thing, but that I'd gotten?
It just, whatever comes to mind.
Okay,
Boom,
so
you're there. What is it?
well, it's a telescope.
Okay.
So
Got back something you had lost, and what was the personal motion at the time?
I mean, personal motion, I guess, was like getting it back. That's the personal motion, right?
What were you doing with your body at the time that you got the telescope back?
Well, I think I was just standing there.
Okay. Where?
In the kitchen when you were. Actually, no. The first time was. Yeah, it was delivered. So, oh no, you picked it up. Actually, sorry, I'm showing the whole world how shit my memory is.
That's all right. All right. Well, you're on this. I'm putting you on the spot too. So.
Yeah. So it was a telescope, and you had just gotten it. You had brought it home, and it was in the box, and I was very happy. And the personal motion was just me standing there. Yay!
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Where was the sun at the time?
That side.
To your left.
Yeah.
Okay. Arthur, can you recall a time you got back something you had lost and what the personal motion was?
Yep. So a few years ago, a friend of mine asked me to help him out to deliver a car in his tow truck, and then as we're driving out of town, he had to pull over because something was loose in the tow truck. And as I got out to grab it, I dropped my phone on the side of the footpath, and I didn't realize at the time. And then so I got back into the truck, and then we started driving to where we were going, and it was about an hour away. We had to drive hour and a half. And then we're halfway there, and then I realized I must have dropped my phone. I didn't realize at this stage that I dropped my phone on the side of the road.
Sorry.
And then we go, and I remember at that time I was like, I actually felt a little bit of relief because I was like, oh my God, now I don't have to worry about any phone calls or whatever. So anyway, so we go there, and this was hours later. And then as we're coming back, I thought by the off chance, maybe it's still there. And it was. Like it was exactly where I dropped it. It was, the cover was open. It was one of those phone covers that had my ID. It was like one of those wallet phone covers. I had money hanging out of it right on a public side path. And for the hours that we were gone, it was still there. And I'm thinking, wow, I must be doing good in the world to receive this good. And then when I got out, I was partly excited, but then also partly disappointed that I had to baggage my phone.
And what was your personal motion at the time that you found this? What was how was your body?
My posture was good. Yeah, no, my posture was good. I was like, oh wow, like I'd felt my posture reflected the way I felt.
Right. Standing upright and kind of standing tall.
Upright. Yeah, and quite surprised.
Okay, so you saw how, to our listeners, saw how quickly, and you did come up with something. I mean, you had an answer, you just had to find it. But I mean, you saw how quickly both Artie and Scientology girl came up with these particular things. Well, past life stuff is the same way. It's just like what you had for breakfast. Both of these things, I don't know, how long ago was that for you? How many years ago was it, Artie?
I'd say about 5 years, maybe 6 years.
And yours was what, a year ago?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do one more. You were going to say something?
Yeah,
I've got a little pop question.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You first.
Right. How do we even know yesterday happened? How do you even know you woke up?
Well, that goes to Scientology girl's question of
Mm.
how you record this stuff, and a being records it. Now, when you're asleep, you're not really recording anything. You exit the body to a certain degree. The reason why you do is because a Thetan plus a body taxes the body. The body needs to rest. You're pushing this puppet around, and the puppet says, enough. I need to get rest, and you being in here is hard on me. Give it a rest. Literally, that's what it is. And so you're giving it a rest, and to a certain degree, you're exteriorizing from the body to let it recover from your use of it. And then when you wake up, there. So that's why you're not remembering when you sleep, is because you're not in this universe per se. And you've ever, you've been
Interesting.
jolted back into the body, and oh, gee, what? And you wake yourself up. Well, that's you popping back into the body for one reason or another. But go ahead. What was your thing?
I was just gonna reiterate TR3 the whole how can you know that it is just you as a Thetan remembering and not you as a consciousness?
Wasn't that the same thing?
Mm.
It is and it isn't, because as a Thetan, what you're doing is you're placing sort of like an identity. There's a boundary to you. Whereas if you're
Is
a
there?
source of consciousness, yeah, because the fact that I am one and you are one and Arthur's one and everybody listening are one, like it's an individual, and
Right.
and it's almost like I have a little bit of a problem with the concept, because it then becomes, okay, well, we're individuating, like uh um that beingness is bigger than yours, and we're assigning sort of roles and individuation,
Mm.
kind of.
Well, it's a
Whereas if
matter of viewpoint more than anything.
if we were just sources of consciousness that was all technically the same, that came from the same source, that was connected in some way,
Right.
that would be more on an equal level and less dualistic, where we assign things to it and say, okay,
But isn't that a viewpoint as well?
yeah, it is. It is.
Interesting, huh?
But
Well,
that's my question.
maybe it's the substance that's the same. Like if theta had was created by some kind of substance. So example, like say a bowl of water, for example.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But then
Arthur's
you
getting it.
start dropping individual drops. But
Mm-hmm.
then you start dropping individual drops in that same liquid. Those drops made from the same substance have their own individual consciousness. So even water, the molecule of water, H2O, has three, for one particle of water already has three entities inside that one particle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't disagree with what you guys are saying.
Mhm.
I'm not like taking it personal. You're not to do what Ronnie said. That's not that's not it, because what I told you about my quote unquote satanic origin story, what I had come up with,
Yeah.
which was not anything like anybody else has ever said the Scientology origin story is. But it was a I was, and then I wasn't, and then I was.
Right.
And okay, there I am. But my viewpoint then shifted from the greater whole, so to speak, to an identity of a set of viewpoints that was different.
Exactly.
Mm.
Okay. And that was because of the task that was given.
I mean, even in, I can't remember. I think it's the Scientology axioms.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm.
says, that basically there was this source,
Mm-hmm.
and from that,
Mm-hmm.
dimension points.
Right.
We as individuations from that are
Mm-hmm.
just dimension points, which means that it's only our current reality that sets us This is my interpretation, though.
Right. Well, in this universe, it is dimension points. I mean, that's
what I'm saying.
points to view. Yes.
It's that
Theta universe, not so much.
we individuated by having viewpoints, dimension points, etc.
Yeah, because you're over there looking at me. He's over there looking at me, and I'm over here looking at you guys. Now we have dimension points, and we have agreed that we are dimension points up to that point. I guess my question would be,
what does it matter?
Well, I don't mean that in a sardonic sort of way, but I mean, okay, how does that help us now?
Well, it helps because I feel like there's a lot of people who like to have sort of an ego-ness about it.
That I am an individual.
Yeah. That my beingness is this great thing.
Therein
less than.
Yeah, therein lies the rub, and that's
buddy, where. Guess what? Given enough time, you'll be just as small as the rest of us.
Right. Well, it's that James Bond and the anti-hero where he tells James Bond, this is my evil plan to rule the world, Mr. Bond. That kind of thing is that they think they have a better idea of how the social order should be, and you look at Star Wars. Well, it's on a galactic level, and the evil emperor and his viewpoints are different than the rebels, and this is what, and we talked about this the other day in one of the podcasts, is this is the game of the physical universe is opposing terminals. That's what this gets.
I think
as opposed to
I've pondered this question quite a lot as well, and my end conclusion to it is I think our bodies are quite limited to the capacity of understanding such a reality.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we struggle so much trying to understand questions like this, because I think it just feels like we're limited. It's like there's something missing in this physical chemical makeup that just cannot comprehend.
It's hard not
or
to
to
view
understand
yourself
or to know.
Yeah,
as an individual.
I know, and that's what I
identity.
mean. Yeah.
It's sort of like trying to parse all of the data with an 8-bit computer when you need a 64-bit computer that can and has a lot more sensors and capability. You can't do it, and this goes back to the dark matter thing, the show, and that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. You're just not able to process it in this meat puppet that you currently have, and that there are, and even Hubbard says, and there are universes. Then he talks about there's the three most common are yours, mine, and the one we agree upon. But there's a lot more than that as well that they bring up in whatever universe it is you're capable of making, creating, projecting, destroying other universes. And like I was talking to you the other night when we first started watching Dark Matter, it came up to me on L10 that there were 6 or 9 of me roaming around in separate planes of existence. And every now and then I get a smacking of what's going on in that one or more of those particular universes. Some of them are better than me, and some of them are a lot worse than me. And you were saying, well, how does that
could be the
happen?
Opposite too?
Well, it could be.
It could be the opposite too. Maybe where, well, we could even be over computing the simplicity of it as well.
It's possible.
What if it's so simple in nature that we find that hard to accept? No, there's got to be more. There's got to be a greater answer to this. There's got to be this. There's got to be that. We understand there's particles out there. Some we can see, some we can't.
Yeah.
Like, what if it's just that simple?
Yeah. Well, and
I do like the first axiom. It's a static.
Yeah. It's a static.
It's just a static.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you
really simple,
you look at Scientology and Dianetics, it's not complex. It's the simplicity that makes it work. And Thetans are simple beings from their own particular viewpoint. and that everything
Mm.
resolves through their own particular viewpoint. So I guess my question back to you would be, can you go back to the
Yes.
state that you were describing? Can you go back to,
Oh, I think that's probably the enlightened state.
back to the egg, so to speak?
Because it would make sense in theory.
Mm.
Because okay, so let's say we're trotting along and we're doing, you know, past lives. We're doing like lives over lives over lives, right? So then, if you reach enlightenment, the goal of enlightenment is obviously to stop the birth, survive,
Yeah, you stop this
decay.
train, I went off, and what train am I on?
Exactly. Then
Yeah.
what are you gonna do? Well, just you'll go back to the source of
Right, you just go back and
consciousness.
go, okay,
Yeah.
that was interesting, and it was a long side rail. Okay, I'm going back to the home office.
Right.
Dunder Mifflin.
So,
Yeah.
you know, in that way, I think you've realized, okay, well, there's nothing really, you know, there's games, but compared to what you actually are, I guess then it becomes a question of why did we individuate in the first place? Why is our purpose to cause and effect?
Well,
Why not?
you can sit and look at a placid lake, or you can throw a rock in it.
Yeah.
What if, I think, is
Yeah.
probably the burning question on every Thetan's mind is, what if I do this, what effect does it cause? And that is the sum of your past lives.
Mm.
I think that's what it comes down to. And sometimes it ends poorly, sometimes nothing happens, and sometimes you get something really cool out of it. But then, I mean, you can take a fatalist viewpoint, and you can do the the rock group Kansas's viewpoint. Dust in the wind. All we are is dust in the wind, and you just get fucking depressed at the end of that song, and you're like, "What's the point of anything? I'm just gonna blow my brains out. God damn it!"
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not. I mean, that's not that cool either.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with going back to the home office if that's what you want to do, and you don't want to play that game anymore. Okay, but not everybody has that same viewpoint, and so they keep going
I had
on
an
and agreeing and stuff, and that makes the physical universe progress, so to speak. That's my take on it, at least.
Mm.
I
Go
had
ahead.
an experience many years ago, and um and it might sound really small, but it was actually pretty big for me at the time. I was by a river, and I don't know, whatever state of mind I was in, I was just in a very thoughtful state of mind. And I looked down at all the stones on the river, and I realized that I could pick up a rock and move it. And just that profoundness of being able to pick up an object and move it
Mm-hmm.
was really profound to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started observing an insect caught in it was like in a little divot of sand. And it was every time it tried climbing its way out, the sand would break under it and then it would fall back in.
Yeah.
And then while I'm observing this, I'm like, I've got a lot of choices here. I could just leave it and see what happens. I can cover the sand over it and see if it can make its way to the top.
Mm-hmm.
I can move it to a place where it can have freedom, or I could just kill it and
Mm-hmm.
see what happens. And then while I'm observing this insect, I look over because we had a fire running, and then an ant was crawling past the fire, and then the wind just blew the ant into the fire.
Mm-hmm.
So I had all these little observations occurring, and it kind of made me realize how we're gods in these bodies.
Yeah, it's
Because
a matter
like
of
in the
perspective.
static state,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and in this human state, you know, just that handful of small experiences really showed me at how cool it is being in a body. Just
Yeah.
the realization of from static to flesh, it's a pretty powerful thing.
Mm-hmm. I would then pass it back over to Scientology girl and give an analogy of when you put your PSVR2 headset on and you stepped into the VR world, and how keen that was and interesting that was to you, that there you were in a completely different mocked up computer universe for the first time. That is sort of how Thetan views the physical universe.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's very fun and something new, and there's, for its
Fleeting.
various purposes
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. However, I think that it's very difficult to comprehend, but I think that we are kind of in the mindset of, well, if we aren't doing anything, then we're bored. And these people that have become enlightened on this planet are not bored. They're just at peace.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of, well, most of what we're doing here is trying to either avoid pain or seek out pleasure.
Yeah,
So that's really our goal.
And the pleasure is causing effects.
Yes.
And
having
then,
effects are caused on us.
right. And then you go, okay, I'm tired of causing effects as Arthur or as Scientology girl or as Jonathan. And so you want to take on a different role and try a different thing. And so you do. And you walk away from that meat puppet and pick up another meat puppet and you go sit on a mountaintop for 10,000 years. Well, anyway,
the last one was shit. I'm going to try a new one.
Right. I'm going to respawn somewhere else and see what I get out of the grab bag this time. But anyway, I hope this has been some food for thought for everyone, and sort of an interesting sideways look into past lives and universes and all of that. And Scientology girl and I and Arthur very much appreciate you listening to our podcast. We will be back with another one tomorrow or Thursday, one of the two.
Yep.
But thanks for being here. For Scientology girl and Arthur Mudakis, namaste, and we love you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.